And okay, fantastic. And then also, Ali, don't worry, we have a team who also then does all of the editing. So if either of us say anything that we want off the record, then we can make that happen.
The bigger problem is we're having our coronation this weekend in central London of the new king.
Mm-hmm.
And I am in central London right now. And as part of that, I have no idea why, but all the internet in central London has gone haywire. I don't know what they're doing. So the more possible thing is I might freeze or something, and you may want to, and if I do, I don't notice it myself, so you may want to.
Okay. Fantastic. We can make sure that's sorted. Cool. Well, let me just do a quick introduction of who you are, and then we can just jump into some questions.
Amazing. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ali, for joining us today on this version of our Inkoversation podcast. Just so that you know, the people who are in the room, we have about 300 staff now spread out throughout Rwanda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And we have about 50,000 micro and small business owners who are also in our larger network. And we're so happy to have you join us today and get to know who you are. But before we do that, if I could just say, we're here with Ali Parsa, who is the CEO of Babylon. It is a leading digital healthcare company, and you are using artificial intelligence to really revolutionize the industry. So Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
Julienne, thank you for having me. And as a former refugee, and once a refugee, always a refugee at heart, I couldn't be more grateful to you and your 300-something staff and all the incredible work you do to help the next generation of people who have been displaced and are in need of everything I benefited from when I was in their position.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. And let's just jump right in. Ali, here you are, you're the CEO of a public company. You are a global leader. But when you were a really young person, you unfortunately experienced forced displacement that so many people in the world have. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and how you went from, being a young, happy kid to your journey as a refugee, and how you settled in the UK, and how that turned into you being a serial entrepreneur?
I think in life, what happens to you happens to you. And to me, I had a happy childhood. And then when I was a teenager, significant political and social upheavals happened in my country. And as a result of that, for better or for worse, I had to leave the country to follow my education. I was 16. I was on my own. I had to leave my parents, and I had to, at the time, there was no mobile phone. You didn't know where you were going to get and where you weren't going to get. And I often tell this story. I lost my father 3 years ago. But I tell this story that my father walked with me, or came with me as close to the border as he could before I had to leave the border town and then smuggle my way through the beginning of my journey. None of that is foreign to any of your listeners. And I remember him holding my coming to hug me to say goodbye as we had to separate. And I was a teenager. And as soon as he came to do that, the smugglers said, "You cannot hug because we don't want anybody to see that you're separating. This will be suspicious." And my father said, "What do you want me to do to a child I may never see again?" And they said, "You do nothing, you don't touch him." And he grabbed my hand, and it felt like almost he will never let go. He was just holding. And he told me that, "Make me one single promise. Promise me you will stay alive until we see each other again." And I, of course, said, absolutely bad. But an hour later, I got arrested on my way at board. And when I got arrested at the time, the thing was that you will get arrested. There was a war going on. You will go to the war as a frontline child. And unfortunately, at that time, a lot of these frontline soldiers, children soldiers, would be forced to walk the mines or will die. I mean, the death rate was massive. And the guy who arrested me said, that's what's going to happen to you, you so and so. And I thought, that's it, we're done. And at that very moment, Julian, somebody that I had never met before and I had never met since ran and said to him, brother, like to the Revolutionary Guard guy, that you have a phone call. At the time, there was no mobile phone. And he said, okay, look after this boy until I get my call. And he went to get his phone. And this man told me, son, that's the border there. Just run to it. But make sure they can't shoot you between here and there. Once you pass that. And I said to him, can I run, really? He said, yes, absolutely. I said, what's going to happen to you when I'm not here? He said, don't worry about me.
Wow.
So I think it is, we all think that when we go and face a situation, who knows, we can never predict what happens, but there is something we can always predict. And that is there will be kind, loving human beings that will gain nothing out of helping you, that will always be there to help you. And as long as you can run, they will always give you the opportunity to run on your own feet.
Well, that's super interesting. I mean, the kindness of strangers, the people who are putting themselves on the line to help people who they have never met before and will never meet again. I mean, that is such a powerful inspiration. But Ali, one of the things that also resonated with me, what you just said, was that you also, in that moment of, I'm imagining, sheer terror and confusion, you also expressed like consideration and compassion for that guard. You know, what will happen to you if I run? And
I think about it.
Did you think about that?
I think about it all the time. I always think about what happened to him. I have his face. I can paint his face right now. But he was by no stretch of imagination the only person who helped me, right? I arrived in UK after a very long journey through different countries. Eventually I land in UK. I didn't speak a word in English almost. I get to the border and I tell the immigration officer something like, I'm made in Iran, I want refugee, something like that. I didn't speak it, I had memorized something. And they said to me, no, you go back to the country you came from. And it was a organization, a voluntary organization of lawyers who said, no, he's a child. And as a child, he has to at least stay the night. And that one night meant 44 years later, I was still in UK because that put them the time to do more kindness, more help, more. I just think, but it is also important that you don't fall apart in that time, can stand on your own feet, that can do what that man asked me to do, which is run, you know.
How did you do that? How did you not fall apart, either from that very, beginning when you have to let go of your father's hand, or when you're running, or when you've just arrived in this new country, you don't speak the language? I'm sure there were some really, really dark days that, over the last 44 years that stemmed from that moment.
There is no person in the world who has been displaced who doesn't have a story of very, very dark days. That's for sure. It's true for all of us. And often when you look at people who have a blessed life where they didn't have to go through these challenges, and they talk about smaller challenges in life, right? And how difficult those challenges are. Yeah. And you look at them and I feel sorry, because I honestly think on one hand, those dark days, those massive challenges were awful. but they were also what Malcolm Gladwell calls desirable difficulties. They were what made us who they are. They taught me that it doesn't matter how bad it gets, it can also get good again, right? And that experience is priceless, because you kind of, Julian, believe that, look, how much worse can it get than where I was? And at that time, you think it's really bad. And yet I used to laugh, yet I used to make friends, yet I laughed, yet I studied, yet I had hopes, aspirations, and things worked their way out. It wasn't, it was bad, but I mean, what is it they say? This shall pass. Everything shall eventually pass, and you move on.
Yeah. So what about that experience? I mean, because, you know, so many people listening are entrepreneurs, whether they're entrepreneurs that have experienced forced displacement or people who haven't, right? Being an entrepreneur also requires those characteristics of resilience, of grit, of powering through when times get difficult. I mean, are you a better entrepreneur today because of your life experience?
Oh,
and
100%.
how does that translate into your leadership?
I am 100% a better entrepreneur. I'm probably an entrepreneur because of it. Because an entrepreneur, there is a misnomer that they think being an entrepreneur is about taking risks. That entrepreneurs are massive risk takers. It's just not true. Entrepreneurs are great assessors of risks. And of course, that means sometimes these risks go fantastically wrong, right? The most famous entrepreneurs of them all, right? I mean, Steve Jobs, right? He faced bankruptcy 3 times in his life, or near enough, right? The most famously, Elon Musk in 2017, almost 15 years after founding Tesla, he was on the verge of it going bankrupt. And he just spoke about 3 years in the doldrum where he lived and slept on the floor of his factory to make Tesla break through the challenges it had, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that you could go through those challenges unless you've been made and seen those challenges before in life. So and so I think, look, everything that is hard makes you a stronger person, but everything that is hard also is hard and leaves a scar in you.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, so well put, is that there's also this, I think the same thing of this misnomer of like, you have to go through hard things in order to see brilliance. And the reality is that we don't actually have to go through hard things. We don't wish hard things on people, but that doesn't mean that we can't overcome when we do, or that we can't face tremendous, you know, opportunities. And, you know, so many times people say things like, well, children are resilient. And we don't want children to have to be resilient, or at least I don't want children to have to be resilient. But unfortunately, it's not always where we end up. Okay, so how do we get from young Ali, who has just arrived in the UK, like, why healthcare? How did that come about?
Oh, you know, a lot of people, after they do something or make something, they kind of retrospectively come in and said, I was a child and I had a dream, and in that dream, I was destined to do this. I mean, the reality is life is a series of accidents. And I actually had to put myself through education. I didn't have any money. So I had locked myself at home, and I taught myself how to pass the pre-university exams. And I sat those remotely from home. I couldn't go to school. And then I went to university, and then I wanted to do a PhD. And to do that, I again didn't have money. So I built a small business to pay for my PhD. And I got the bug to do the business at that stage. So as soon as my PhD finished, I sold that business. And I saw the investment bankers who sold it for me did really well. They were suited beautifully. They spoke really nice. And, I just said, could I ever be like them? So I worked really hard to become an investment banker. Eventually, I was helping to lead the technology investment banking efforts in a small way. And then my first child was born, and I took a small paternity, short-term paternity leave, and I saw this beautiful thing in my hand, and it made me reassess. I said, look, I love to be an entrepreneur. I really don't want to be a banker, investment banker. And not because there's anything wrong with investment banking. It's just, it wasn't for me.
It wasn't your passion.
It wasn't my passion. And I'm a builder. I love to build something, and something meaningful, something that matters to what I was. And investment banking wasn't meaningful enough, for me at least. And I decided that initially I want to be a full-time dad. 6 months later, I thought this is the hardest job on the planet, looking after children. And I wasn't very good at it, I thought. And I went, but I was doing also a series of surgery that I had to do because I used to do a lot of sports, and I had damaged my knee, and I had time to try and see if I can fix it. And I saw the hospitals that I did it in, private hospitals, surely like better than that. So I went to the chain of hospitals, largest chain of hospital in the UK. And then I thought that hospitals at the end of the day are highly unscalable, very expensive. They deal with very small part of people's healthcare needs. Yeah. But most people need primary care. And so can we take most of the healthcare most people need and make it available on the devices most people have, and make it highly accessible and affordable by making it remotely available on their mobile phones? And that was the genesis of Apple.
So it's fascinating. I mean, your journey to entrepreneurship is quite interesting. And, when we've heard this from many other entrepreneurs, it's that same thing of, they didn't wake up or have a dream as a child that this was a particular industry. It was that they saw opportunities. And then as those opportunities grew, became more and more invested. But what's fascinating to me about the story of Babylon is that, you started in the UK. This was a place where you were living, you got some early traction there. Things were going well. And then you decided, we want to expand to Rwanda. And I'm assuming most UK businesses don't say, we're doing well in our home market, now let's go to East Africa to start our work there. How did you come to that decision, and how has expanding into Rwanda helped Babylon sort of in its growth trajectory?
So our mission in Babylon from day one was make healthcare accessible and affordable, and put it in the hand of every human being on earth. Mission, then going from UK to France or to Germany, you're just doing the same kind of human beings, right? And you have to stay true to your mission and to your belief. And we thought that Rwanda is a country that is very different than UK, with people who are as deserving as people in UK for healthcare. And so that's the mission part. The other part of that is the being very selfish as a business. Every business, when it gets started, it's learning, it's gathering, collecting knowledge. If I went from UK to Germany, very little I would learn apart from local differences. If I go to Rwanda, where the payment system is very different, culture is different, the affordability is very different, the availability of healthcare is very different. Even the mobile technology is very different. There is no smartphone, there was only feature phones. I have to learn so much more. And at the end is the collection of these learnings that will create the moat in a business. It will teach you so much that your other competitors haven't learned much and haven't figured out how to cope with those situations. So I think it was important to our mission, but it was super important also to build a business.
That's fascinating. One of the things that we say at INKOVersion is don't delay learnings. And it's that same, right? It's that same thought process. It's where can we go that has similar enough environment where we don't have to completely radically change our product, but that's different enough in the environment where we need to adapt in ways that could have benefit for future scalability. And that's also, as an entrepreneur myself, like that's for me what keeps it fun, is in that growth point of learning. And I think that so many entrepreneurs miss that point. You know, they say to themselves, I've mastered this particular box. Now, how do we replicate this box and find environments where that replicability is going to be most advantageous? But I think they miss that opportunity to extend that learning. And one of the things,
and that is bad business, by the way. A lot of times, Julian, people force you, your financiers said, hey, you figured out how to build this shop, go build a shop exactly like this somewhere else, right? And somewhere else and somewhere else. But it's true that in the short term, you will really do very well out of that because you are maximizing the yield of that single learning and you're not investing any research development into any new learning. The problem is after a while, everybody else, if your learning is little, it's very easy for everybody else to learn that little too. And then they can compete with you and then undo you. So if you look at PCs, everybody at the beginning made money out of building personal computers, right? And eventually everybody learned how to build personal computers, and eventually nobody learned how to nobody made money on building personal computers. And all personal computer companies, one after another, went bust. The one that survived and dominated the world was Apple. And the reason they did that was not because of their personal computers or because of their desktops or because of the mobiles, but computing. But they did it because they went from iMac to iPad to iPod to iPhone. They just kept going. They learned new things, brought in new things, while other people, like whatever their name was, and I forgot them all, like they did nothing new, right? And eventually that became a challenge. So it's this balance between short-term maximization of your cash and long-term maximization of your value. And you have to get that balance right. And it's so much easier to say than deliver. And remember, Apple in 2001 practically went bust. And it was a $150 million investment from Microsoft, I believe, that allowed it to survive to see a better day. And the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, was fired from Apple, had to come back, and the company was taken over by some pen pushers that just almost destroyed it, and he had to come back and fix it. So even at its very height, entrepreneurship is a very hard thing to do. And anybody who says it's easy, and there are many people who tell you it's easy, or if I was doing it, is that way.
Right.
But people who've never done it before. I watch for sports avidly, and while I'm sitting on my couch, I'm watching it on TV. I can tell you everything those players have to do.
Yeah.
that put me on the pitch, and I wouldn't survive 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. So you made up an interesting point there about sort of maximizing, cash for the short term, but then value for the long term. And bringing that back to communities of forced displacement. There are over 100 million people globally who are forcibly displaced. There are 38 million people on the continent of Africa who are forcibly displaced. Many of these people are in very protracted situations. They've been refugees for more than 20 years. They've been living in camps for more than 20 years. But there's this tension, I would say, because these are in some ways temporary situations. You are in a camp because you've fled, you have desires to go someplace else, you have desires to be able to return home when safe, and now you decide to start a business. How do you set that mindset to say, am I building for the short term because this is temporary, or am I building for the long term because the long term is a bit more of my reality?
Yeah, I mean, you just identified a really interesting example of why building anything is so hard and why it's so to the context in which we are talking. I honestly have no idea what the solution at that time should be. And if I pretended I did, that shows nothing but my arrogance, because anybody will know that is the specific condition and situation that figures out the true outcome. Look, a human being shares 83% of its DNA with a cockroach. That's 70% difference. It makes us human and make them a cockroach, right? I have no idea. But one thing I do know is that, and that has always been my motto in life, 4 very simple things that became the motto in Babylon, the first 3 of it, is that wherever you are, in the context of where you are, dream big. It takes as much hard work to build something small than it is to build something big. Work is hard, right? 2 is build fast. Life is transitory. Even if you are maybe you're in a camp for a few months, but even if you're not, you're stationary somewhere, it's a few decades. Eventually life passes on, and it passes on as much older now. I can tell you it passes on very, very fast. So be in a rush, have a sense of urgency that you want to do it fast rather than procrastinate. And thirdly, be brilliant in whatever it is you build. There is no point in cutting corners. A beautiful, brilliant shop in a camp is as important as a beautiful, brilliant shop in Champs-Elysees, right? For the people in that area, human beings always want the best they can have. And finally, if you are dreaming big, make it part of your dream to make other people's dream come true, right? I mean, just don't do it all for yourself. So I don't think these principles change because you're somewhere small or somewhere big, or they are what define you as a person.
So in a sense, what you're saying is that it's those values that you have as a person that, and how that translates to you as an entrepreneur. It's that, being a values-driven company, dream big, be fast, be brilliant, is not, it's not temporary, because those are values that you have wherever you are, wherever you go, and for however long. And why do you think it's so hard for so many entrepreneurs to say to themselves, when they're trying to make payroll, when they've got cash shortages, to say, I need to focus on values right now, right? Do we teach people in business schools or in business classes to focus on the nuts and bolts of the business? And do we spend too little talking about why values are so important?
I think that we should be careful about naming everybody who builds or creates a business to make a living an entrepreneur or an innovator. Those two things are different, right? If all of these things are different, right? If somebody gives me all the money and say, go and set up this, I don't know, kebab shop for me, I'm not an entrepreneur because I've taken all of their money. There is no risk. I'm just the manager of creating that kebab shop, right? But even if it's my money and I created it, and I am then an entrepreneur because this is my business. But if this kebab shop is like every other kebab shop, I'm not an innovator. I just copied the kebab shop and I'm serving my community. Now, if I went out there and improved on a kebab and made it a better kebab than everywhere else's thing, now I'm an innovator. I innovated it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that these are very different things. And so many people look at the Steve Jobs and say, but why isn't this guy like him? That's because he was an innovator at a global scale. And he was, frankly, in the right place at the right time, too, right? Mm-hmm. He was at the Silicon Valley. He wasn't in a camp in Sudan, right? I mean, where all the capital in the world was available to him and the right conditions came together. So the context also matters. But you're absolutely right, Julienne. The pressures on us is often about looking after the short term rather than the long term, trying to make a return rather than trying to build something big. Now, I also have to say, anybody who tried to build something global with all the challenges that it has, that's not easy either. You have to be prepared that if you dream big, you have to be prepared for it not to come true too, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not, nobody's guaranteed you success. And when you fail, by the way, everybody will come and do what a useless person you were, all the mistakes you made. That's why you failed, right? And until you do it again and succeed again. I always say Edison was a failure 9,999 times out of the 10,000 times he attempted to make a light bulb until he made the light bulb. Those 9,999 times were not failures, they were learnings. He was learning how to finally succeed. And life is like that. It's you fail until you succeed. You and I, when we were babies, we tried to walk and we failed thousands of times until we managed to stand and walk and then run and then do this. So, by the way, one great trait entrepreneurs should have is being a little bit deaf is not a bad thing. Like you don't want to hear all the people who say all the things they do.
Well, you have to drown out the noise because there's so many distractions in the world in general. And, you know, being a successful entrepreneur requires so much focus and also so much putting your heart on your sleeve, putting yourself out there. In so many ways, our businesses are extensions of ourselves, right? I know that, you know, in the work that I've done, you know, part of this work is an extension of my personal values. And it is something that can feel very vulnerable when you're, you know, under so much public scrutiny. So I think that's also a very important point.
And Julienne, have you failed or have you succeeded? Because at any moment in time, you have done both. You have failed. If you wanted to make your organization instead of 400 people, 4,000 people, say in your things, you have failed. But if you have made it into 400 people, instead of 40, you have succeeded. If something goes wrong, all your fundings have been taken away right now. We are living in that environment in the technology world where all the funding has been taken in the Western market from us. If you fail because your funding is all taken away from you, you could go back and say, I failed. But you have saved thousands of people, helped so many in that process. So you succeeded. You created the thing for others. So I think we over-index for this word success. I think we live in a society where everybody needs to be a success. The reality is we are all failures and we are all successes at the same time, all the time.
Yeah.
And we just have to accept that life is a combination of the two and there is no such thing. Show me a successful person, anyone, and I will show you a failed person at the same time.
Yeah. And I would say, one of the things that we say quite a lot is commit yourself to the problem you are trying to solve, not necessarily to the solution you have today. Because if we're solving that problem, then we're always going to be iterating. We're always going to be taking in the learnings, the feedback that we're getting from our markets. And if I think that the products, the services, the delivery channels that I'm using today, if that's the measurement of if we've succeeded or not, it's almost like we failed because we're not acknowledging that we're in dynamic markets. Ali, when you were just saying, we're almost 400 today and maybe we'll be 4,000. To me, I said to myself, no, I want to talk to you about how we can use artificial intelligence to change the trajectory of our staffing model in ways that I can't even see for myself right now. But it's because we are so committed to solving that problem. And that's where you say success, say failure. It's like, we're still moving along.
Very true. Very true.
Now, Ali, just a couple of sort of last questions for you. You have probably received a ton of advice over the years. What are sort of one or two pieces of advice that you've received that you think every small business owner should know?
Oh, there is no such thing. I'm sorry to say that. I just think that every piece of advice that you receive has a value in the context that it applies. Mm-hmm. And our learning is because we learn all of them and we remember most of them and we experiment with them. If you take any of them out, then that becomes the most important advice that you should have had that you didn't receive, right? So unfortunately, I'm too old to believe that there are heroes or there is the one key that opens all doors or one advice that solves all the problems. I think that we should just gather all those knowledge, learn them and apply them appropriately. Sorry for fudging that question, but I dodged it.
So what you're saying is that there's no silver bullet to success in the entrepreneurial world?
No, there isn't. It takes a lot of perseverance, commitment, working, getting on. But I'm saying even more importantly, there is no such thing as success in the same way that there is no such thing as failure. We're all trying to make a living. We're all trying to make a contribution. And I have a company that has $1 billion in revenue today, which is a complete failure compared to a company that has $100 billion of revenue, a complete success compared to what I wanted to build when I first started, right? It's irrelevant. We should just take the burden of this constant measuring ourselves against others and against things and just do our best to make the world around us a better place and in the process have fun. If we constantly think, am I successful, am I successful, am I successful, all we're going to do is make ourselves miserable because success is a relative thing.
Yeah. Now, so in so many ways and for so long, I would say the world has looked at refugees, internally displaced persons in need of humanitarian assistance. And we look at these communities as places where that's driven by humanitarian solutions. And one thing that we're doing at INKOVersion is trying to change the mindset to say, these are vibrant markets. These are communities of contributors. There's already private sector, small shops, transporters, agro producers that operate at a micro scale, but there's still this activity in these communities. Now, is there something that you think the rest of the world, people who haven't experienced forced displacement, is there something that those entrepreneurs and business owners can learn from the entrepreneurs and business owners who have experienced forced displacement or who are currently still living in camps?
Absolutely, because I tell you this, if you believe that you're a collection of experiences you have, then you believe that the more experiences you have and the more people of different experiences you bring together, the more successful you would be. It's like DNA, right? The more DNAs you collect in a human being, the more successful genetically that human being will be, rather than a purebred, right? You even see it in dogs and cats, right? And if you look at societies in history, there has never been a society in any part of the world at any time in history that succeeded by isolating itself. There has always been, was it Persian Empire or Istanbul of today, which was the Eastern Rome of the old times, or the Roman Empire, wherever, the Mongols, whoever succeeded was because they brought a lot of cultures together and they allowed a lot of experiences to flourish. And I think these countries, these cultures that tend to keep other people away, are fundamentally putting the seeds of their own future destruction in place. If you look at today, the country I live in, United States, and you just go around and say, who are the most successful communities in there? At the very top is the Indian community that migrated. Then is the Filipinos, then is this, then is that, right? So people look at the Filipino community and say, but I remember in the old times, my maid was Filipino. Well, guess what? Today, your boss is Filipino.
Right.
Right? I mean, the child of that maid of yours now become your boss, right? And it's the boss of your child, right? I just think that, listen, Julian, there is no society that has not benefited from immigration, that has not benefited from people that came to it. Most people who come, by the way, one way or another, are forced to come. Nobody wants to leave the place of their birth voluntarily to go somewhere else, right? I mean, and become the place that attracts everybody, rather than the place that isolate yourself and you fall apart, and you always will. I mean, one of the reasons Babylon has made the limited success it did is because we hired people from 60-something different nationalities of different social, ethnic, sexual backgrounds, right? And just higher experiences, collect them all, and you said it very well, right? That it is about experiences we collect and learn.
Well, Ali, thank you so much for this conversation. It is always such a delight to hear from you, to listen to your story, to see how you've been able to take that collection of experiences and continue to offer services to more and more people in this world. And one of the comments that you made that sort of just is resonating with me so much, and all of it ties in, is just be able to make people better, right? Help people along the way. That it's the values that we have, but it's also that we want to make this world a better place for so many people, and how it's completely possible to do that through business, by learning along the way, by continuing to be bold and dream big and do it quickly, because there is a sense of urgency, because there's so much need and so much opportunity. And Ali, it's just, thank you so much for all that you do for this world, for all that you do to make us a healthier people, and for continuing to inspire and teach.
Thank you, Julie. This is super kind of you. I tell you, when I die, I want to come back and work for fantastic what you do too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And please, the next time you are in East Africa, let us know. We would love to say thanks in person.
Thank you so much. All the
All
very
right.
best.
All right. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ali. All right. Take care.